Hey everyone, welcome to the Vinh and Ali Show, where today we're going to be looking at the book Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich. It's a classic, isn't it, Ali? A classic.
It's old, it's a classic, it's on every must-read self-help business book list, I think, probably over the last 50 years.
It's the one book that whenever you talk to anyone, especially when you're in your early 20s, everyone's like, oh, you got to read Think and Grow Rich. My memory of this book, I think, is better than my experience of just rereading it again. And I listened to it as well. Look, I'm not shitting on this. I listened to it as well. And what really annoyed me when I listened to it was I listened to the guy who read the book probably from the 1930s. And it's like, hey, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Think and Grow Rich. What you got to do is you've got to make sure and I'm like, oh, damn it. This guy's voice is so annoying.
That's hilarious. Yeah.
And that's basically...
I listened to it too, and it was I wanted the original classic version, but no, that's hilarious.
I don't know how I came across that, and it's just the whole time while I was listening to it, and I was just losing my mind because I just can't stand that old school radio voice.
Yeah, and today
all you gotta do is No, mine's better than yours. It's
yours
like
is way better. I don't know why. Why did I bother?
Yeah, why did you try that? That was stupid. It sounded terrible. I'll have to do some of the quotes in this book in that accent, I think.
Oh yes, well, look, most definitely.
The book was written in 1937, and Napoleon Hill interviewed, I think, Andrew Carnegie, and then Andrew Carnegie was so impressed by Napoleon Hill, he kind of commissioned him to then interview 500 plus millionaires at the time. And then kind of Napoleon Hill went on this journey to learn, well, what are the common traits among these 500 plus millionaires that he interviewed? And I mean, I just think that's interesting even to begin with that, because it's like, I actually looked it up because I was curious. And in 1937, there were about 2 billion people in the world. That was the approximate global population. And when you interview just successful people, I kind of view it through this lens, right? It's like getting 2 billion people, getting everyone to flip a coin, and the people who flip 100 heads in a row happen to be the people who become successful. And then you interview just the 100 people who flipped, or the 500 people who flipped the 100 heads in a row. Because I think a lot of success has to do with right place, right time, right people, right environment. There's a huge luck component. And there's also a danger in that, right? Because if you just interview people who are successful, they kind of give you this perspective of success that may be true, but may also not be true, because someone might just say that, I just kept thinking about it every night and every morning before I went to sleep and before I woke up, and now I'm a millionaire, and it's like, well, is that all you did though?
Yeah.
So I think when I read this again, I kind of went, oh, so much of this is about mindset. There's not enough pragmatic takeaways. Not a lot of this is psychologically proven through studies. And so, look, this is a great mindset book, but if you need some of those pragmatic takeaways, look for something maybe a little more modern and psychologically backed.
See, I think there's another side to it too. I love how you put the context of this book was written in 1937, and it probably was one of the, if you look in the last 100 years, it was probably one of the original, call it self-help, personal development, professional development books. So I think it's hilarious when you do read through it. And I love the original version because they have done modern versions of this book. But the original version still has like racial undertones. It's all about men. Like it's got like, you can feel like it's written in that time, where now it's obviously got aspects of it that's quite outdated. But then I also look at it on the flip side and I'm like, well, this is still a book. Like not many self-help books or professional development books outside of like, say, the old philosophical sort of texts and maybe stuff from the Renaissance and all that has really lasted all that long. So I think that there are components in this, and even when they're then looking and breaking down, because I think a few of the main people that are referenced in there, you mentioned Andrew Carnegie, who was, I think he was the richest person in the world at that moment in time. It was Henry Ford. It was, the stories are about Thomas Edison. Like, it's these people that we have read their biographies. So it's interesting, I think, to get an insight into what was their psychology and their mindset all those years ago. And what are some of the, like, if you really dig deeper, what are some of the core principles that are still applicable? So I agree. This is a book of kind of putting aside some of the stuff that just as him randomly writing his thoughts and beliefs at the time that probably weren't proven, but then also then figure, like, I think exploring some of the aspects that maybe still do hold up today. And I remember, I think for both of us, this was probably one of the earlier books that we read in our journey. So I'd love to explore what it meant for us. I first read this book in 2015. So what's that, 6 years ago? Looked back on some old notes that I had. And then
I read this book like in 2004. I read it when I was...
Awesome.
I read it a lot. I read it when I was still in high school.
Yeah, that's amazing. So that'd be cool to reflect on what it was, what the book maybe meant to us back then, and then what we thought of it on this reading from where we are today.
I think something really interesting to point out as well is that, you know, if you're early in your self-development journey, this is a great book to start with, I think, as well. Yeah. Because, you know, when you've kind of read for as long as we have, you know, and you go back to it. It's like, you know, when you say, oh, Monkey Magic was the best series ever. And then I recently watched it again on Netflix because it was released on Netflix. Worst thing I've ever seen. It's like the dubbing was freaking awful, the original series from Japan. And you know how you have kind of those really beautiful memories of the past, and when you revisit them, it's really ugly. That was my experience. But I mean, it wasn't all negative, because as I read through it, it did remind me of the key parts where I really still do connect with. Yep. So it's interesting.
Okay, let's jump into it. Like, I'll tell you one of the first notes that I just wrote down. We can jam on this. But when I was reading just the start of this, the one thing that I got nostalgic about is I think that this was one of the first books that got me truly believing that you can turn ideas in a dream into a reality. So taking aside, you know, the motivational aspects and the fluff and all the pseudoscience that's probably in it, I think that this was a book that then filled me with that component that I think's required, especially say in an entrepreneurial journey, is, oh wow, yeah, like every single great idea or great innovation or great business started with someone having an idea somewhere and then taking some actions and then turning that idea or thought into a reality. And I think that was that was just one of the first points. Like, how does that resonate with you?
You're right. It was the one book that truly made me understand and truly helped me see that everything does start with a thought. And I wrote a thing down where I wrote down, we reap what we sow what we do what we are, and we are what we think. And if we're going to go backwards, that means that everything starts with a thought, because we are what we think, and we do what we are, and we sow what we do, and we reap what we sow. So to me, I love that sequence, because when you look at it, it starts from action and it goes through a little process, and it turns out in, you know, it starts from a thought, then it ends up as an action, or the actions all start with a thought. And I haven't come across a book that painted that picture more clearly. Yeah. And when I think about that, the most interesting part of the book that I still connect with today is that the whole concept of the ether, and where that's where thoughts come from. Thoughts come from this ether, and the thoughts of, you know, in this ether, the thoughts of Henry Ford and Thomas Edison and all the great minds of the past, their ideas are still floating around in this ether. And if you kind of tune your mind in the right way, or your brain, you can tap into that ether and connect in with some of those thoughts. Like, that was probably one of the coolest things the first time I read the book, and even now when I read the book, that I'm like, I really like that. Whether it's real or not, who knows? But I really like that, because where do these thoughts come from? I mean, where do thoughts come from? And I mean, logically, I just want to say that, it's from the summation of all the experiences that you had so far, and those things percolating in your subconscious, and then they just kind of pop up when you think in a certain way. But some ideas that you have, they don't even come from past experiences.
Yeah. It's one of the, I agree. It's one of the biggest notes that I wrote as well. It's when you sit there, like, I don't know about you, but I always get my best thoughts when I'm in the shower. And it's like, where does that come from? Like you're brushing your teeth or you're doing something and this thought or this idea comes from. Like, you're right. Like there is something unexplainable around where do we get our thoughts from? Like we can't predict them. Like I don't know what I'm about to say next besides choking on my own saliva.
That's gross.
Imagine if I died on
died on air. Wow, that would be amazing.
That would where imaginary thoughts come from.
If you died on air, that would probably give our podcast some traction, because then we'd make like the news headlines, and I'd would get an extra 1,000 downloads, and we might even get a Spotify deal after that. And
so you're saying it's worth it. It's worth this
absolutely
sacrifice.
is at some point. If it doesn't take off, then you should die on air.
I think that's the contribution I can make. His greatest contribution was dying during the podcast.
And then the podcast took off, and then it sold for 100 million to Spotify.
Yeah, because then it would make like all of the thoughts and ideas and everything that we've discussed probably a lot more profound. It'd be like, oh wow, there was wisdom in that.
The crazy thing too now is if you do die on a future episode on air, this is almost like a prediction. They would look back on this and go, holy shit, they predicted his death on air.
Jeez. It's like this, you just organize a hit. So then halfway through an episode one day, it's like a wrestle. I obviously go down pretty quickly because I'm not that physically strong.
Well, there is a potential way now too to take it off track even more, because just before the podcast episode, you were talking about how much you loved Vita Soy, that soy milk drink. And I actually did work with that company in 2016. So I could reach out to them, get a customized bottle made with some poison in there and send it to your house.
That's where you went. I thought this was going to be a really kind end to the story where you're like, I'll reach out to them. I know you, Ali, you really like the drink. Let's get you some bottles of the drink. But no. No, wreck their brand as well by poisoning.
Laced with cyanide.
Just melt away. That would be a cool death too.
That would be a viral death again, allowing us to reach more people
the
and have more impact.
And the foamy gurgling.
That's how you have impact. That's how you have impact. Is that you launch this podcast into the stratosphere with your death.
Oh, where were we?
Talking about the ether and talking about, well, I like the idea that, like, I love the whole concept of the ether. I love that even people who have passed, their ideas are still floating around in the ether. And then again, to give people more context about the ether, it's kind of like radio waves, and your brain is a radio. And there are these waves just still floating around, ideas just still floating around. And if you tune your brain right, you can tap into those vibrations or those radio waves and get the ideas even from the past. And one of the ways that they described it in the book, which I thought was so cool, and what it says is your subconscious mind is the sending station. That's where you're able to send signals out. And then your creative imagination, that's where you receive. That's where you receive the radio frequency. If you allow yourself to be creative, and it's like you're opening up to receive. And then it talked about how there are 7 positive emotions that you could use to help yourself receive. And then there are kind of the negative ones that cause you to not be able to receive. And I'll just quickly list them off here. But the 7 positive emotions are desire, faith, love, sex, enthusiasm, romance, and hope. And if you've kind of in that kind of headspace, then you're in the most optimal headspace to be able to receive from the ether. And then the negative emotions to avoid are fear, jealousy, hatred, revenge, greed, superstition, and anger. The more of that you feel, the less likely you are to be able to tap into the ether. I thought that was cool. I mean,
that is cool.
It just tells you that if you live in a state of positive emotions, you're more likely to be able to tap into good ideas and have good thoughts come into your mind.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I think that's the other part when we talk about some of the negatives around this book is this was, again, one of the foundational texts. And then it's kind of been added on, like a lot of probably what Tony Robbins does is based on the original thinking within this book. The Secret and the law of attraction and on all of these other bits and pieces that people hear about where it's like, oh, I imagine a bike and then the bike rocks up on my doorstep. Now, is there truth in that? I personally haven't had it happen without some sort of action or other things. Like I've never wished, I don't think I've just wished something into existence. But that's where, again, I think that it's an interesting book because some of the stuff isn't logical, but I also think some of the stuff can work when used in a practical format, right? Like when you're talking about, say, the ether, if you're aware of, just call it where your ideas, on a more fundamental level, your ideas and thoughts come from, but then you have the level of awareness to then write those ideas and thoughts down when they're being creative, whether it's journaling or putting them there. To me, I call that collecting dots, because it's like, all right, well, these concepts are coming and running through my head. I then need to trust, we refer to it as intuition or getting a hunch or a gut feel. To me, when I start feeling those things, I'm pretty alert to them and I'll start writing them down because a lot of the times they've then transformed into some sort of practical idea. Whether it's, like, say, us doing this podcast, it would have started the exact same way. It's like through a combination of events, timing, thoughts, ideas. We then ended up getting to the point where, hey, man, how about we do a podcast where we read a book and we start exploring it, right? Like, where does that come from? We didn't plan that. That was like a collection of things. Or whether you becoming a keynote speaker, that idea would have come from somewhere. Something would have triggered it. Me starting Future Golf, like that was an idea there. So I think it's more about the alertness to the thoughts and the ideas and then seeing where can that potentially then lead you to.
That's a really good point. I think if you start to focus on it as I'm getting lots of different dots and it's about my job is to connect the dots, but be alert to the dots. I think that's a really awesome insight. I don't think we view it as dots. I don't think we view ideas and emotions and things that kind of come to mind as dots. Sometimes we just, we fall into autopilot, right? How easy is it to just one day blends into another, 1 week blends into the other, 1 month blends into another? I mean, I bloody can't believe it's already June. That's ridiculous. Yeah. But it's so easy. I think we fall into the trap of just everything just on autopilot. And then you're no longer alert. You're no longer, you should, like, when you're driving your car and you're driving on cruise control and you're on autopilot, essentially, you're less engaged with the road, right? And the road being the metaphor of life. How often do you have cruise control on right now in life? And if you're not paying attention to where you should turn off on the highway, then shit, you might have already missed the stop. And now, now you're stuck on this highway for another 2-3 hours, right? So I think being alert to it, wow, that's so important.
Yeah, and I think also valuing, because we're so programmed these days to value logic. And like, if you go back to the book, Thinking Fast and Slow, like system 1 types of thinking, where it's really surface level, we can see it, we can feel it. Reaction or like the quick stuff, the automated stuff, because that's so much of our life. Whereas there is still this second part that does exist in all of us, whether it's us dreaming, whether it's having an imagination, whether it's those random coincidental moments that are unexplainable, like when you meet your partner or you have a kid. Like there's all these things that can't really be explained with logic. But I think a lot of the times we don't then note those down, document them, collect them, and then try to create something out of that because... yeah, there's that I think for most of us, that's where the magic lies. Like when you look at the real memorable things, it's like, and then I bumped into my wife at work and we just sat next to each other and started chatting. It's like, you can't explain that stuff. There's no system 1 thinking going on there. It's luck, it's coincidence, it's whatever it is, spontaneity.
Well, I mean, life isn't logical, right? I mean, that's why we can't apply logic to everything because the way things happen in life, it's not logical.
Yeah.
It's like everything is just random. Yeah. It just feels like everything is random, just chaotic almost. And then we try to apply logic and say there's a pattern to this and there's a pattern to that because otherwise the chaos of it all, I think, just makes our brain fall apart.
Yep.
Whereas when you really think about life, I just think it's just bloody chaotic. How crazy is everything? And that's what I think too. I think the whole idea behind there being a pattern to success is just us human beings wanting things to fit in a box and things to fit in a 13-step process, that if you do these 13 things, you'll be successful. Whereas I just don't think that's the case. I think the chaotic nature of life, again, how many people have followed these 13 steps and never become successful and have never experienced even a glimmer of success, right? It's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy when you start to think about it and go down that rabbit hole, because that's the kind of rabbit hole I started going down while I was reading this book. I just thought about how many millions of people have read this and applied this nonstop consistently. And 14 years later, are still like, yeah, I'm still not successful. Like it's scary to think about.
I'd nearly go the other side on that though. I would say how many people have read this, like even off the back of the Depression, when this book was written. And my guess is, if we just sort of visualizing what that time would have been, where there's not that much optimism, there's not that much going on there. I'm pretty sure this book became quite successful relatively quickly. And if you look at the back end of that Depression era, where that was what probably the United States is like capitalistic or entrepreneurial, one of their peaks in that point in time during the 40s and 50s off the back of the war, right? And I wonder how many of those people would have then credited some of the thinking behind this book, because I don't know. I think if you do apply 80% of this book, it does take you somewhere forward. Like the idea of, say, because there's tried and tested theories within this book that are consistent in a lot of teachings, whether it's visualization, whether it's having clarity on an outcome that you want, whether it's making an action plan and having steps to then get that outcome, whether it's joining with a mastermind group and joining with people that can help you then grow and learn from. So when I break it down like that, I'd actually go the other side. I think if you sat there and you did all 14 steps, but you took no action, and you just wish that, all right, well, I've now done one part of it where I'm clear on something that I want, whether it's like $20 billion, and then you just sit there waiting for it. I think you're 99 out of 100 times, you're probably going to fail going on that model. So that's why I don't really resonate too much with things like The Secret. So apologies to anyone who's a big Secret or Law of Attraction fan there. I think it's like, to me, that one just feels a little bit like I'm playing the lotto every week and let's see if I get lucky on it. Like the odds of success on that just seem really reduced. Whereas at least with this one, there's people that did stuff, like the stories there are of Edison and like the great innovators and of Henry Ford, where it's like, oh, well, these people actually did persist. They did keep going through. They kept trying to create value. They utilized their skills. They connected with other like-minded people and formed ideas and deals and all the other bits and pieces. So I don't know.
Well, I think using myself as an example of what, almost that pessimism that I just experienced 5 minutes ago, I feel like it's so true though, because, if I go through life with positive emotions, I look at things in a positive way. Whereas just a moment ago, I had a moment where I looked at this with like negative emotions, and that just completely changes the way I think about the book. But then also, more importantly, it makes me not even want to try. Right. Yeah. So I can see how negative emotions in just even a moment during this podcast can so easily deter you from taking action. It's kind of crazy.
Let's explore it.
It's kind of crazy. Yeah.
I'm feeling a cringy type of vibe here. So let's explore it. Like, what was it? Was there something specific that you read in the book that made you feel like,
well,
I don't know.
Let me look through my notes. I mean, I understand why it's good, but when I think the part that makes me feel cringy is just the whole, the way they were aspirational in the 1930s. It's just, I think the way it was written, I think because it was,
it It's the
maybe it was
guy's narration that really threw you off as well.
Yeah, I think it was that. I seriously think it was that. It was just that, when it says the way you got to get rich is write down how much money you want and then imagine it in your head as if you already have it. And I'm just like, All
right, so let's hit on this point. I agree.
I reckon it was that. I think it was the way it was narrated, because when I read it in my head, it didn't seem as bad, but then I listened to it and then it threw me off really hard. And like you said, it was a different world back then. So some of the examples that they used, I was like, it doesn't feel like it's relevant. So I think it was just the time it was. I read the original. So I had the original in my bookcase. So I kind of took that out and I must have listened to the original too.
Yeah. Which is what we have to do. It's about the original. You don't want the modified U version. You want it raw, like how it was.
But I mean, but then again, if I kind of look at the other side of it, when I read about the mastermind, I love that section. Yeah. I absolutely love the mastermind section. So like you said, let's dig into this. Let's pick a few things and let's dive into it.
Okay, so you mentioned that one of the cringe-worthy ones where it talks about essentially writing, what do they call it? Is it a definition statement or a vision statement?
Yeah, it was like a 6-step by to how to become clear on what it is you want to do.
That's right. And it essentially goes by like, Vinh Giang, by December 31st, 2022, will have $1 billion in my possession. I'm yet unclear on how this will come into my possession, but I will provide the best level of service that I can in return for that $1 billion. So it's like a detailed visualization exercise. Now, I like this one because I remember writing one of these when I read the book and having like numbers and stuff. And I remember not believing it at all in the slightest. And I think at that
Did you still actually have that?
Yeah, I had it in my notes when I looked at the old book that I wrote. And it was something along the lines of, Ali Tarai, by, I think it was in about 3 months' time, will have, I'm not going to say the number, X million dollars in my possession. I will do it through the service of like 2 things that I never even ended up doing. And I'll clearly have blah, blah, blah. And I remember laughing and having a look at it. But I think that's one of the exercises. And it'd be interesting to note, because to me that one feels like a bit like vision boardy. I haven't been big on vision boards, but I know a lot of people believe in vision boards where they put it up and then all of a sudden they get the black Ferrari in the garage or whatever. Like, what's your thoughts on that? Is that the bit that's making you cringe on it a little bit? Or have you done an exercise like that?
No, I think what it is, man, is that it was written in a different area that I don't connect with. I think a huge part of it was just, I kid you not, I even think it was the dude's voice, the demeanor, and also the era in which it was written for. I think we live in such a different world now. I think some of the lessons still apply, absolutely. But I just think it's written in a different world, a different time. And I didn't know what that time was. And when I read it when I was younger, I kind of read it with a much less experience. So to me, I was more kind of in awe of all these lessons because I haven't learned any lessons really before that about life and, success principles. But now as you kind of zoom out in the modern world and you have a better grasp of it, when you read on some of it, it seems a bit. And look, I'd really have to say that the guy who just read it back in the 1930s or whenever it was kind of audio recorded, it just seemed a bit silly, Yeah. But I definitely connect with a lot of the lessons. I think what you just described in that bit there before, I think it is important to know how much do you want to actually make, and how will you actually make that money? I think that's so powerful because a lot of people just come up with a number, but what kind of value are you going to offer the world to be able to get that number? And then that value you offer better be pretty valuable. Otherwise, you're not going to get that big number that you want. Yep. So I think it helps you gain clarity going through these steps. And it's a great exercise. I think so. I just want to be clear. I think the only reason why I feel weird about it is, I was just listening to a bit of it again this morning, and I think it's just the accent that throws me off and the era that it was written in.
So for everyone out there, if you speak like somebody from the 1930s or 40s, just get in contact with Vinh. He'd love to have a chat with you. I'd love to hang out.
I can't do it. I can do it for a movie, but I can't do it for a freaking 10-hour audiobook.
Well, we'll wrap up the last sort of we'll finish off the negatives and then we'll cleanse ourselves and go into the positives. I think the last bit for me was just how much of it was just around money. It wasn't around anything else. It was purely around the acquisition of cash, which I guess it's in the title, right? It does say think and grow rich.
Think and grow rich,
But there are principles in there that probably could have been used for other aspects of life. And maybe, again, it's the era then. It was off the back of the Depression. It was all about trying to get prosperity. But the book is largely about money. So again, if money is something in your life where... I think this book is so perfect for, as you said, people that are on the start of their journey of, say, personal development or some type of financial, economic type of transformation. Like, this is nearly a must read. As much as we've spoken about some of the negative components of it, there are concepts in here that, say, if you're in a job that you hate or you're in a really tough financial situation or position, there'll be things to you inside this book that will probably help you be able to transform that in some way, shape, or form, I believe. So
you were just able to articulate what I wasn't able to articulate. And it's that's another primary reason. Is we just went off the back of doing the podcast with Naval's book. And if you haven't checked it out, make sure you go check that podcast we did out on that book, and then make sure you get the book and check it out, because that was a very wholesome book. I felt like it touched on multiple areas of life, wealth included as happiness and, mental well-being, fitness, health, everything. I felt like it touched everything. Whereas this one really just focused on wealth. I think that was, and then you paired the focus on just money with that accent. And to me, it just wasn't palatable.
Yeah.
But you're right. There are so many other good things. I wrote so many notes reading this again that I really do like about it. So thank you for articulating that, Ali.
All right. What do we want to jump into?
Well, I think the first one is desire. Well, that's one of the first points that this book talks about. And I mean, the line that I got from the book here is that it says, the starting point of all achievement is desire. Keep this constantly in mind. Weak desire brings weak results, just as a small fire makes a small amount of heat. I really like that, because you'll find that in life, whether it be some of your friends or some of the people in your social circle, there are people who have, weak levels of motivation or not very ambitious or, again, don't have a lot of desire, and the fire seems small. And I think that's just because they're not working towards something they desire, or they haven't discovered something they desire. Which made me think about, wow, it's so important, because when I look back to whether it was my magic career or my keynote speaking career or teaching communication, I really desired these things. And that at the core of it was my fuel source. So if you don't desire something, it's like kind of when we're courting our partners. If you didn't really desire your partner and your wife, then you're not really going to make a big effort, right? I've got some people in my life right now who are in the dating game, and when I see my friend desire someone, I'm like, wow, you could clearly tell he's really going after this person. And then, you sometimes see him go, I'm not really into that person. And you kind of go, wow, but that metaphor can be applied to your professional life and your life in general. Are you just kind of meh? Or you're like, oh my goodness, I can't wait to take this person on a date. I think, which kind of speaks to the importance of making sure you spend time discovering what it is that you desire, right?
Yeah. I think it's interesting even how you mentioned what we spoke about in the last episode with Naval. It's that mixture of having dreams and desires, but then also not getting too worn down or attached to them as well, because then there's a flip side to that. But I agree. I think it's like we always say, it's a combination of both. And this book is fantastic on that side, that if you may be in a zone where there isn't too much action happening, you're feeling a little bit flat, I think getting into that mindset of, all right, well, is there something that I can aim for that can energize me a little bit to get me moving forward a little? And I think that's something that's a really cool lesson out of there. And even just in our society these days, like with the kids, I don't think we train people to dream big or to aim for bigger things or to go and like, there's that cliche stuff. It's like, oh, anything is possible. You can do whatever you want. But from a practical standpoint, it's the support and nurturing, I think, of people's dreams, essentially. And I know we speak about it all the time as well now where we are in life, where sometimes maybe because we don't have the level of ignorance around some of the difficulties that come with trying to achieve your dreams as well. Sometimes it's easy to even just say, oh, I'll just be content now and I'll just chill out. But then there's still always that little voice in the back of your head that's like, what if we did this? What if we went for that? And I think it's important to nurture that voice and to at least acknowledge it. Like we mentioned at the start of the episode, collect the dots, see what the thoughts are, see what excites you. Is there anything out there that you've always wanted to do that you've been putting off? I think life is about that as well.
I think the only way to tap into the power of desire is to collect the dots. I mean, when's the last time you sat down and really thought about the dots that have presented themselves in your life? And even think back to even in your early childhood days, what were some of those dots? I think the collection of dots is necessary for the clarity of what your desire is in life. Often we're not using dots to then dictate what we do in our life. Often we use the things that society looks up to. So society will look up to someone who is a professional, someone who is an accountant, a lawyer, that's a partner in a firm, potentially a doctor. That's what society kind of deems as being success, right? And then what happens as a result of that is instead of leaning on our own dots to create, a path or a profession that we desire, we end up just kind of putting ourselves into generic professions. So I feel like an important step is to give yourself time to look at some of those dots, even speak to your parents, your family, your friends. Well, what are some of those dots for you? And see if you can find some kind of pathway that leads you to something you desire. Because when I read that desire chapter, which is one of the early chapters, I went, wow, desire is such a powerful force. And when's the last time you felt that? I don't think a lot of people tap into that. I don't even think sometimes I tap into that as often as I should. Because when I tap into desire and when I really desire something far out, it's such a powerful force. But to have that requires thinking time, requires kind of piecing together the puzzle and connecting dots that sometimes don't seemingly connect. Yep. And into the book, it kind of gives out this 6-step process to go through. It's like the 6 definite practical steps to transmute desire into financial equivalent. And the first one is, let's just give people the 6 steps that it talks about. The first one is fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. So again, it's financially based, but what's that number? And then determine exactly what you will give in turn for the money you desire. And then the third step is establish a definite date in which you intend to possess the money that you desire. And then the fourth one is create a definite plan on carrying out your desire and start straight away. Don't fall victim to perfectionism, just start. And the fifth is now you write out that clear, concise statement of the amount of money you intend to acquire, what you kind of did at the start of this process, what's the amount, write out the whole statement and then read that statement out loud twice a day in the morning and at night. And it's interesting reading that because I think when you have no pieces of the puzzle, start with that at least. Start with how much money it is and what you're going to try to do to attain that money. And then you're gathering pieces of the puzzle as you go. And if you piece it together and you're like, hang on, that doesn't look right, then don't be afraid to redo the puzzle again. Because I think one of the things the book writes about is most people, once they put together the piece of the puzzle and they go, crap, that's not the puzzle I want. This is not the career I want. This is not the life I want. Damn it. But it's too hard now. I might as well just stick with this puzzle for the rest of my life. I think most people don't have the courage to take the whole thing apart and then try it again.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, I know we gave it a little bit of crap earlier in the episode, but what that really felt like is it's a focusing strategy. So if you've got lots of noise going on, and even if you look at a financial goal, for example, a financial goal's kind of a good one because it's really trackable. It's measurable.
Solid.
It's a number. So you can just write that number down. And then if you combine it with, I love the second part around, well, what am I going to give in return for this?
I actually really like
to
that.
then make it happen. Like
really
that's pretty cool. And then even the repetition of keeping it front of mind. I know it's the overused analogy, but it's like if you want a red car, a red Jeep, if it is, you're going to see a red Jeep everywhere that you drive around. You know, it's a focusing tool. So if you have an amount in your head and then you know what you're going to deliver in return for that, and then you're constantly repeating to yourself, well, this is one of my focus areas. I think just organically, you're going to be a lot more attentive to opportunities and to actions that are required to help that that result eventuate. And that's one that I have definitely seen personally. You know, I use the project management tool Asana a lot. And I've got goals that are sitting in Asana that have been there for a number of years now. And it's funny how some of these things, like I'll generally set dates to them. And it's interesting how things have just happened around the dates or within, say, 6 months of writing down that initial thought or that initial goal. And yeah, usually there's been actions there, but it's just surprising that it just helps align those actions, because it might be a little thing, even whether it's subconscious. It's like, oh yeah, well, I did want to meet that person, and then an event might pop up, you book in a ticket, then you end up getting the opportunity to then meet that person that you had written down. Then you look back and it's like, well, look at that. Strangely enough, I got there. So it's that combination of maybe dreaming, collecting the dots, writing it down, and then taking some actions. But there is something in that, I feel.
Yeah, well, definitely. I mean, step 4, right? Create a definite plan for carrying out your desire and then begin at once, whether you're ready or not. I think when you set a due date, what happens is it forces you to act and create. It's like for us, right? We went through a period where we stopped doing these podcasts for probably about 3-4 months. And that's because we didn't set a date. And now that we set a date every 2 weeks, all of a sudden we're back on the bandwagon and we're doing these every 2 weeks again. I think there's absolutely power in setting that date for what it is that you want to do. Because I think often when we look at, that's why businesses who are in the client service arena, they always have a date when projects are due. We have to deliver to this client by this date. And it's why you can be so productive when you're in a formal business like that. Whereas when a lot of people jump from that world into entrepreneurship, what they find is they lose a lot of productivity because now there's no due dates anymore. And the moment there are no due dates, productivity is stifled. And I think this is such a cool process. Now I'm even realizing the value of this even more when you just write down the amount of money you want, and then you think about what service are you going to render to get that money. Even that step alone is really cool. Yeah. I mean, that's newfound respect.
We're changing. Yeah, I just shut on that whole thing like about 10 minutes ago, and now I'm like, because this is actually quite good. This is because I'm hearing it growing.
But it's because I'm hearing it from you. I'm hearing you say it with a much better demeanor. I love the way you're saying it, because I think there's a thing about language written back in the day as well, that when you write it in a way that's so I don't know how to describe it even. It's written in a way that's very flowery almost. Yeah. Whereas the way you just described it, grandiose. Is that?
Yeah, it's a bit like motivational, and I think it feels a little bit arrogant at times. Maybe, I don't know. But I really value that. I really value what you just said in that. Yeah, it's so powerful just thinking about, I want to make $1 million and I'm going to do that by being a magician. You know, like that is incredible clarity. It's incredible clarity to get that. Just start with those two things. Just building on that, one of the notes that I had, and I love this concept when it might be relevant for people that are in a more traditional type of job. And they speak about the selling of your personal services as a method to achieve what you want. And I love it. There's a line, I don't have it written down in the book, but it was something around the lines of, don't go and ask somebody, oh, do you have any positions available? Which I think still happens even now, nearly 100 years later. Like, I don't know if you get the emails, but I still get the emails all the time. It's like, hey, love what you're doing. Do you have any positions available? And it's like, no, I don't. I definitely don't, because I have no idea what value you can then contribute for that. And I think that we still see that. Like, people will go and hand in a resume somewhere and expect, like, it's nearly the equivalent of the LinkedIn message where it's like, I have an agency, I will build you an app. It's like, no, you will not, because why would I do that? Just because you copied and pasted a LinkedIn message. Like I think that there is still this concept, even now in the working environment, where we do this, where we're not proactive enough with how we design our careers and even professional pathways. And I remember seeing that a lot when I was even in the corporate world, where I'd have chats to people because I was pretty young and I was really curious. I'd see somebody that's been working in a job for 10, 15 years. And I'm like, oh, you've been here for so long. Do you love it? Like, why are you doing it? What are you doing? Oh, no, it's a pretty secure gig. And I'm just happy, I'm pretty comfortable. It's easy for me to do. I could get it done in a few hours and then I can look at news sites for the rest of the day. And I'm like, yeah, like, I guess that's cool if that's what you want. But to me, I'm like, well, here's an opportunity to then design a role. And I think that's where this book hits on that. It's like, all right, well, if you've got a slightly bigger goal than your current situation, what value can you then provide for that goal? And I want to dig into this because I know we've both seen really cool examples of people doing this that aren't that hard to replicate. It just takes a little bit more effort. And I'll share one of them. So one of the guys that works for Future Golf, his name is Jeremy. And Jeremy, funnily enough, we connected through LinkedIn. I put out a call for building our advisory board and getting some more experts involved so we could then learn and just get more intelligence, I guess, coming in through the organization. I remember Jeremy's message still, like, it was something along the lines of, look, I'm probably not at the level at the moment to be on the advisory board, which funnily enough, he would have been anyway. But he's like, this is my areas of specialty and expertise. I'm actually a member and I'm part of the community. So I've been watching these things. These are some of the points of feedback that I've got. These are some of the things that I could see that you're doing. So these areas of expertise are marketing and digital and that sort of area. And then he went on and essentially mapped out a strategy. He's like, look, I know I won't be doing the advisory stuff, but without asking for any payment, signing on as a client, doing any of these other bits and pieces, he just started delivering value. And then the next step was like, just give me some access to a couple of your accounts. I'll have a look over it. And then he just sort of took it, right? Like, so without me even knowing what the hell was going on, all of a sudden I'm like, yeah, well, everything you're saying is logical. It's true. It exists within the business right now. We're missing that level of expertise as it stands right now. And then he just slowly started solving problems that he could without overstepping too much. And just creating value, repetitively creating value, like over and over again, where it got to the point where I'm like, hey, what are you doing? Like, can you come and join our team? And then they just slowly started going to that position. And he essentially earned himself a role without it having to be created, without it having to apply for it, without us having to go to market. Because it's like, well, we've been doing or trying these things for 5 or 6 years. And you've just shown us a whole different way and new level of doing this. And I love that concept and that thinking process of a reach out with value attached to it and making the risk for the person who's making the decision really, really low. Like, I think in the book, they even speak about it. They're like, well, back in the Depression era days, they're like, don't go out there just demanding a job or asking for a job because of this. Like, go and volunteer, go and do an internship. And I think the quicker that you can then add that value, like, that's the perfect person that you want in your team. Somebody that comes in, delivers value, doesn't make you risk anything up front, and then makes it a no-brainer for you to then bring them on. Like, you should get a pretty aligned person from that too, because then you get things like trust. You actually care about the other person as well, because you're like, well, wow, you've given us already so much. how can we then return that back to you? Like, it's such a perfect model than the traditional way of getting a gig. So anyway,
it's amazing hearing the story of how he joined the team, because how many people do you think are actually like that? Because that is it's like he basically was an employee before he became an employee. He was a part of the team. Like, he acted like he was working for you already.
Yeah.
Essentially.
And
that's without the official title and the pay.
And every single team member that we've had join Future Golf has joined that same way, which is mind-blowing. So they've all joined essentially through an internal apprenticeship where they've been a member or they've been part of the community. They've had a defined skill set. They're usually working a different role at the time where they're using that skill set. And then they've then come in, usually as a volunteer. They've added value. And then once they've created essentially their own value and it's become a no-brainer, then we've tried to get them on board into the team. And I think it's been every single person so far has joined that way.
Why do you think they did that? Because
I think a lot of,
did they want a job in the career or in the profession? Did they want a job in this industry? Is that why? Is it because of their love of golf?
Yeah. Yeah. I think 95% of it would be the passion alignment to what we do. So whether it's they're already a member of it, they have an understanding of the vision, the culture, the space, it's for a love of the game and growing the game. It's a combination of those. But I think it's also having the ability and the freedom, because our environment's a lot around freedom and autonomy to be able to then grow and then to be able to utilize your skill set. So for some of our team members, they've had a really awesome skill set, but then they've worked for an organization where they're not maybe fully aligned with it, or they're working for a team where it's just such a large organization they can't execute on the things where they have that skill set. Whereas under this model, it nearly becomes organic alignment because it is a small team. It's a relatively small organization, but you're able to then paint your own picture within that unit.
When you were saying that, I just reflected on my own journey as well. And when I started my journey as a keynote speaker, the number of events that I did where I didn't get any form of payment, was greater than 50, right? It's just, you do that because then you're able to show people, instead of just telling people what you're capable of, you're able to show them. And I think that's what Jeremy did. He was not just telling you how great he was showing you, and he showed you by just doing it, as opposed to waiting until there was a formal contract and then doing it. I think a lot of people wait for the formality because they want to be reimbursed for every moment they're doing something. And I think you're right. That is a flaw in the way that a lot of people think, because that means you're just doing what 95% of other people are doing. 95% of people are saying, well, look, I'm not going to start to do any work for you until you start, you punch in my time card. Whereas he punched in his time card without even you agreeing it, because he was happy enough to do it for free. Like, I think there's so much value in that. But also, you got to think about a couple of other things with Jeremy here. He's really good at what he does. Because if you were someone who was terrible and they wrote for you this awful campaign and started working for you and were just terrible, then you wouldn't have hired them. So he had one of the things that the book talked about. He had specialized knowledge. He was a master of his craft. So I think you can only do this when you're really good at what you do. Because if you're average at what you do and you do this, you're not going to get anybody's attention. So I think we got to really highlight that as well.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the real key here is let's assume most people have an area of knowledge or expertise where at least 90% of people don't have it. It might be knowledge in building a Lego, all right? Like, it won't matter what it is, but there'll be some unique skill set or combination of skills that everyone has, whether it might even just be something like, I'm just very organized. it's like, oh, well, that's cool. We need some event helpers. We need somebody who's punctual, who's available on weekends, who's organized, who knows the rules of golf. Like, so you can find these skills in so many different areas where you can then provide it. Like, I think, yeah, definitely in Jeremy's case, it's a little bit different because he's such an expert and so specialized. That's a slightly unique situation. But then I think back to Rowan, who's been pretty much the number one person who's impacted future golf over the last 7 years. Rowan came in, he was an accountant previously, and he came in pretty early. So at that point, again, we were unsure of what we really were yet. And he just came in with, I'm just keen to help. And he seemed like, it's like, well, you're a good person. We've caught up at a few events here. Get involved. Let's get you out there. And then he used a more generalized ability of just being able to learn, take action, high energy, lots of persistence. And then he developed skill sets in that ecosystem rather than coming with defined skill sets. Because if we only utilized his defined skill set, which was at that point in finance, we wouldn't have been able to unearth and unlock everything else that then ultimately made him general manager. So there's a few unique different models there. But I think the underlying theme here is, if you have goals or you want to then better align yourself with your passions or you want to create some value in your life, like, go and do the free model. Like, it's nearly the human version of the freemium model. Like, go and create value in the app, get them hooked on you, and then start charging. Like, that is, it works. And you've done it. I've done it. So many people that we know have done that approach where they give something up at the beginning and then
do you know what the main barrier is from people doing this?
Yeah.
The main barrier is because of the financial obligations that people put themselves under. Let's say that you've got someone who's in their mid-20s who, they went out and got a really fancy car and put it on a loan and then potentially have a really nice place. They're paying a lot of rent and then have a really expensive lifestyle. That's why a lot of people can't do it. It's because they need the money. And I think that's why you got to be so careful, especially if you're young, not to live above your means, but live below your means. Because when you live below your means, you're able to do this.
For sure.
And I think in the materialistic world we kind of live in today, everyone's kind of living above their means. And as a result, this kind of idea of doing work for free, people are very resistant to it because they go, well, how am I going to pay the bills? Yeah. And it's like, well, reduce the bills so you can do this, so you can get into a job that you really love, in an industry that you really are passionate about. Otherwise, I think that's one of the main barriers.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, again, it's nearly the beautiful thing about this approach and this system is, again, it goes into alignment. Because if I'm speaking to someone and they're like, I absolutely love what you're doing at Future Golf, but I just can't come over for the dollars, then it's an easy fix anyway. Because it's like, well, it's not really about the dollars. It's right now, because if your value is that good, the dollars will always look after themselves, right? Like, if you go to someone like, it's like, say financially, it's like, oh, well, I'm an expert in commercialization. I'll create you, pick a number, right? I'll create you $5 million in new deals. You're going to pay that person adequately for the new business that they're bringing in. But then if you're speaking to someone for a role that you think's worth X amount, but they're currently getting paid 40% more than that and they're valuing themselves there, to me, that's just like, well, I would probably stay where you are at the moment because you are getting peak of the market. You're overvalued. You've designed a life where you potentially leverage. To me, these are also signs that maybe the alignment isn't that much of a fit, because if you're then coming into, say, a startup where there's a high degree of uncertainty and you need X amount, it becomes an obligation and a weight for everyone as well. So there's a flip side to that, again, where organic alignment will take place. Like, usually salaries and those components end up matching around where they need to be, because then you take in things like, oh, well, do I get to do what I love? Do I get to do all these other bits and pieces? But I also think there's a cop-out in that other side when people are like, oh, well, I can't really do what I'm passionate about because I need to just focus on what I'm currently doing, which pays for my thing. I think there's still misalignment there, because that means, as you said, you've got you've got materialistic weights that are probably going to inhibit aspects of you being able to enjoy your life. And for a lot of people, the real common one is do job that I hate, get paid lots of it, get to pay off really big house. Like that's the most common version of that. And then a lot of the time miserable in said house that is big, because miserable for 80 hours a week, living life. And it's like, oh, well, does that logically make, like, we all do it, so it's become an accepted form of living, but does it make that much sense? I'm not too sure.
I don't think it does. I think the more things we try to acquire, the more it traps us. And, you know, it's again, because when we look at social media and we look at the people that are successful on social media, we see the big houses, the fancy cars, and that makes us want the same thing. But what happens is it causes us to create false desires in our mind. We think we desire that big house. We think we desire that fancy car. But what we truly desire is probably connection with our friends and probably doing something we're aligned with. That's what we truly desire. But we kind of trap ourselves in a way that now we no longer can do the thing we desire. Now we're stuck doing the thing we kind of don't like. We trap ourselves.
For sure.
So, I mean, I love that idea. And then you're right, the book did talk about that. I think one of the examples it gave was, you know, two different people during the Depression. One person kind of just gave up and said, no, I can't do it. There's no job out there for me. The other person went out and did a better job than their best employee and ended up getting the job, right? And, you know, just go, oh, no, I'm just going to do it for free. And then ended up being the better employee than one of their best employees. So it became a no-brainer for the employer at the time to employ that person. That is long gone. I haven't heard of stories like the one you've mentioned about Jeremy in a long time now, Ali.
Really?
It's like,
yeah, okay.
Well, I mean, one of my team members, Craig, my videographer, I remember this was in 2015. You know, he had a little video business and I was doing a magic show and he said, hey, why don't I do a free video for your magic show so you can get more people out to your fringe show? You know, and that's turned into a friendship and a working relationship now for over 10 years. You know, we worked together even before that. But again, it's the willingness to take the talent that you have and gifting that talent to others to aid them in achieving their goals. Yeah. I mean, if we're just to put that eloquently, that's what it is. It's other people who take their talents and gifts and they gift it to you to help you get closer to your goals in life. I mean, how can you not work with people like that? Especially again, if they're good at it, what they do, right?
For sure. Oh, and it's a common story. You hear it just over and over again, where whether it was, I think, Steve Jobs volunteering at Atari to start with, and that's how he started building games and got into the tech, or like spending time with Hewlett Packard in their offices. You know, like every single one. I think Elon's got similar stories where just volunteering and building your apprenticeship, building your connections, building that level of reciprocity with other people. Like, because that's the other thing as well. Like, we've had people that have done stuff with us and we haven't had a position at that moment in time. And then it's been like, look, completely understand the situation. Thanks heaps for doing that. And then the opportunities then popped up maybe 2 years later. And it's like, well, when you're then thinking back, rather than going to the market, or even if we go to the market for that role, you're always going to think of that person because you have seen a component of their work, you know, their working habits. And you really get to see the person at their peak when they're doing it in that environment, when they're balancing it against something else. Because then you're like, geez, that person did that while they were doing this only as a small fraction of their time and bandwidth. Like, imagine what they could do if this was their full focus. And that's where it's really cool as well. It's like, don't go and volunteer. The other part to this is don't go and volunteer and half-ass it. You kind of touched on this before. Like, if you're going to go and volunteer, give it your best. Like, don't just go in there and just be like, oh, because I'm doing this for free or I'm not doing it at my normal rate, I'm just going to throw it in. There's no point. You might as well not do it. Yeah, it's a waste of your time and everyone else's time. Like if you're going to think about this strategy, think about your dream role, or think about the dream person that you maybe want to work for, the dream organization, and then make that plan around what level of service am I going to provide and for how long, and do I even care if I get a gig at the end of this, because I just want to be exposed to that. I want to learn from that organization, that culture, develop some additional skills. That's probably the approach.
It is the approach, because often when people think about doing things like this, they often think the only form of reimbursement or the only form of reward is financial. They don't think about the experience they're going to gain from it, the relationships they're going to develop, the connections that they're going to have, the people they're going to be exposed to. They don't think about any of that. It's kind of focusing purely on just the financial gain.
No.
Whereas there's, I remember there was a quote, I can't remember which book this was from, but it said that, if the only form of reward you're getting is financial, then you will forever be ripped off. If the only thing you're getting from your job is money, then you're in the wrong job. Right? Because there's so many other things that you can demand or expect from a career path that I think, when you're in a position that is bad long enough, you kind of go, oh, look, I'm just doing this just for this reason. Whereas that's a person who's settled, right? Who's settled for, this is all that my job's ever going to bring me, and it's a paycheck. That's it.
For sure.
And whereas a lot more you can get from a job.
And even when you think back on all like stories and autobiographies, when businesses are then speaking about their story or like the entrepreneurial story, how much of it's around, when we're in the garage and we're doing it for free and we're figuring it out? Like how little of it is 15 years in where they're restructuring, they're hiring lots, they're doing acquisitions, they're then selling. Like there's so little there. That gets like half a chapter at the end of it. Like so much of it is when people are essentially in the free zone. Probably the same with athletes. Like they love their rookie years. They love when they start it. There's not all that much around when they sign their 5-year, $900 million contract or whatever it is, because then it starts becoming pressurized and all the things that you maybe enjoyed and loved about it start shifting a little bit more as well.
Kind of makes me think that a part of this whole journey in life is about struggle. Because what you're talking about is they remember the struggle the most, and they don't remember the glory as much, but it's more about the struggle, right? It's more about when you're learning on your feet. And it reminds me of that book we read, we did a review on that not long ago, A Catch of the Decade.
Yeah.
Right. The 80% of the book was about the struggle and all the things that were going wrong, the fires that they put out and how creative they had to be. And then like the last 10% was, we sold it for $1 billion. We were very successful. Yeah. And that was it.
It's true.
Yeah, I mean, but here's the thing, right? And if you take that to the next point in the book as well, is that sure, let's say that you have that dream job you want, and you have clarity and you know what you desire. You got to have faith, right? And faith is an interesting choice of word because I would have said it was you got to believe it's possible for you.
Yeah.
And whether you use the word faith or belief, you can use whichever one you want. But I think that's so important because let's say sure, you know what your dream job is, and I think for some people, they actually know what it is that they want to do, but they don't believe that they can. And as a result, they don't do it. So where did you get the belief, Ali, that building something like Future Golf was possible for you? Where did that belief come from?
Probably because I went into it with the mindset that we were just talking about. I just genuinely didn't care how it performed or what it did as an entity. Like it was one of those things that I went in with such a high level of, I guess, freedom and just curiosity and desire to learn it. Because for me, it was never about building a successful business or a successful organization. It was about learning the art of entrepreneurship and being able to practice it and play that game. Like that was the thing that I really wanted to do when I looked back at it. And my biggest goal was like freedom, right? Freedom to do something that I love with people I love, freedom to create, freedom to test ideas. And then if that resulted in some type of outcome, awesome. Because I knew that after a certain period of time, for it to be viable, it would need the commercial aspects, right? Like if we wanted to hire someone, if we wanted to then do it as our full-time focus without having to work full-time jobs, like that's kind of my story. So with that, I didn't have, I was fortunate. I was still working a full-time gig for the start of my journey. So I was able to do this essentially on the side and to learn and do my apprenticeship without it putting too much stress or pressure, especially on that financial security component. And that's why I always still recommend it to people. I'm like, well, if you're going to go and do something that you love, like you can put all your eggs in that one basket, but it might be a little bit more stressful because there's no guarantee how it's going to pan out. But if you can kind of do a bit of both, where you've got your security blanket, but then rather than watching Netflix for 3-4 hours, you then building or learning about these things. And that's why I was able to trick myself into how fun it was to do this. So it's never felt like work. It's always just been like, well, no, I'm learning. Like, this is an education. This is a form of enjoyment. So then it removes that thing of this being an obligation that, oh, this is the last thing that I want to do after I've worked a 9-10 hour day. And
so you're saying for you, the way that you were able to believe that it was possible was you didn't put so much pressure on it. You kind of approached it with, you didn't have that many expectations essentially, right?
Yeah.
And your primary focus was to explore, learn, have a good time.
Yep.
And also the fact that the fact that you had that kind of security from your existing job at the time. You didn't jump into the deep end straight away.
Yep. So it removed some of the dangers in that.
But you see, a lot of people do have a side hustle. They do have, they are focusing on this as well. But it's like that deep self-belief that it's possible.
I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Like where does that come from for you?
I think a lot of it probably comes from my mum as well, just growing up. Like, it was one of those things, even though we grew up in an environment where we didn't have much, mum always really instilled me with confidence. It's like, all right, well, if you actually do try something and you give it a real red hot go, you should be able to do it. And it was undeserved levels of confidence that she had, probably because we didn't have much in terms of resources. So it's like, at least I'll arm you with confidence so when you do go out in that world. And I think that's what, I don't know, like, I think some of those things, like say confidence and belief and all that, maybe they are a little bit more just internal. Like, it's hard to
I find that really interesting.
Describe it, but I've also never been too attached to things, if that makes sense. So that helps potentially with the level of belief, because I think the antidote to belief is usually fear, right? Like, in the book speaks about that as well. Like, I think when we are scared, that how's this going to impact what people think about me? How's this going to impact my financial situation? How's it going to, impact all the things that I've worked so hard for? Like, it would have been really easy for me to get into that mindset and be like, oh, well, I've dedicated 10 years to this career. Why am I leaving it at its peak? I'm potentially risking the financial security of my family if this goes pear-shaped. Like, you can start thinking all that stuff, but it doesn't really help too much. Like, I've always just been a believer, like, well, go give it a crack, see where it lands. And then if it's not where it needs to be at that point, keep trying something different. Like, and that's, I think the book speaks about persistence as one of the key messages in there. I really resonate with that. It's really hard to control the outcome for everything, right? Like, right now we sit here in a position and, we're in a spot where life's pretty good, say, on that side of things, but that can change pretty quickly as well. Like, we're in the midst of a global pandemic. It's just mind blowing saying
you're currently in a lockdown.
Yeah, we're in a lockdown right now. Like, it's mind blowing that the economic consequence hasn't been greater. Like, and I'm just speaking for people in Australia, for example, where I thought when this thing started 12, 15 months ago, like, most of us, there'd be a high percentage of people that would be struggling to potentially provide for their families. Like, that was just what it felt like. If somebody told you that the whole world's going to close down for over a year, you'd think that it would be pandemonium out in the streets, right?
Yeah, same.
Fortunately, that hasn't happened. But I think it's also important to have flexibility and openness to change as well, because that can then help levels of belief, right? Like, say if that version of apocalypse did kick in, I would have looked at changing the strategy and being like, all right, well, how do you then operate now? Like, do I need to go and clean toilets? Sweet. Like, if that's what it takes and that's the opportunity that's available, we'll do it. Like, it's, do we need to band together as a village and get all our neighbors together and we cook together really cheap meals? Like, sweet. Like, if that's the thing that we do, like, that's the move. But I think it's that flexibility in approach.
Yeah.
Also potentially helps with belief.
That's a huge one that I haven't connected to before, is that flexibility and adaptability is one that helps with the belief so that you take action, because that no matter what happens, you can kind of be water in that sense, right? And you're flexible and you can just adapt.
Yeah. And
that's a really good one. I like that.
Yeah. So fear, I think, plays a huge role in that, because we're always scared about what we're going to potentially lose.
But the fear sometimes isn't real. It's not
imaginary.
real.
I'd say most of the time it's imaginary.
Yeah. And if I can just share one immediate example, and it's that, like, I just always go back to what's the worst case scenario? And for me, the worst case scenario is just go do accounting.
Yeah.
And then, well, it's not that bad then, is it?
Yeah.
It's bad for me because I don't really particularly enjoy that career path. But in the grand scheme of things, when you take perspective and you take a step back, it's not that bad. So when you actually break things apart and look at fear and the things that you're afraid of, and when you realize that it's actually not that scary, that is a contributor to helping you build the belief or that faith.
For sure. I think that's what happens, right? Like when you have things like the pandemic, it's really easy to get attached to things that have been happening in the past. Like, the term is the sunk cost fallacy, where it's one of the conversations I was having even with Future Golf, and it was a really open and candid conversation with an advisor or mentor. And we're talking about, well, what happens if, you lose it because golf's closed for 18 months? This is in the midst of it when we're in a lockdown for 2 or 3 months. And it's like, well, I guess at the end of the day, it just is what it is. Like, you can act on and change what's in your scope to be able to influence. But if there's certain things that you just can't control, then you just have to accept it and then move on with it. Keep evolving, I think. So,
yeah, well, I mean, it's really interesting to hear you talk about all the different components that helped you believe in what you were doing so that you would take the action. I feel like that's where a lot of people don't even get to.
Like, you went from, like, you've picked, I know we just spoke about that. I think your one, like the career paths that you've chosen are probably, like, the odds of success in your career paths are arguably some of the lowest maybe going on out there. Like, to become the level of keynote speaker and to get to those heights that you've gotten to. Like, what about you? Like, I can guarantee that wasn't an easy step up. Or even to become like somebody that could do, let's go back to magic, for example. Like, how many people out there would be able to make a career, a sustainable financial career out of magic, do you think?
Well, I mean, whether it's magic, comedy, or any form of the arts, it's a very low percentage. There's lots of people that do it as a hobby, but there's not many people who do it professionally.
And highly competitive.
Highly competitive because, again, there's not a huge demand for these things. And if we bring it back to the same question I asked you, but applied to me, is that, where did I get the belief to be able to do such a thing, whether it's the magic or the keynote speaking or whatever it is? To me, it was, first of all, well, if you want to play this game, you first have to know how to play. So surrounding myself with the right people helped. If you want to believe it's possible, then spend time with people who are already doing it. I think that's a really useful one. So whether it was other professional magicians or other professional speakers, the moment I surround myself with people who are already doing what I want to do, that helped a lot with belief. Because if I started going around telling my uncles I want to be a magician or a keynote speaker, they don't like, to them, you're telling the wrong people. Whereas if I started talking to magicians and professional speakers, my personal circles always said, it's impossible. You can't do it. And when you ask people who are already doing it, they don't say it's impossible. They say, this is how. And when you're around people who say, this is how, that very quickly changes your beliefs. So to me, find the this is how people. Don't talk to your friends who are thinking about leaving their jobs. No, talk to people who already left their jobs and doing the thing that you want to do. Do you know what I mean? I think it's
so simple. It's so true.
Yeah, because I think a lot of the times we stay friends with the people we stay friends with because it's easier. It's hard to make friends as adults, man. It's hard to find new circles, man. Like it's so difficult. It's so funny because it goes back down to such a simple skill set that we learned when we were like 5 years old, how to make friends in the schoolyard. But it was easy at that point because everyone was trying to make friends. Whereas as adults, we already formed these tight-knit groups. And then when you're trying to infiltrate a tight-knit group, it's so freaking difficult. But if you harness the ability to make new friends, that is such a powerful skill set as an adult. Even when you're trying to find a new career path, something that you desire. Even when you're trying to get rich and build wealth, if you build that skill set and you want to be a property investor, then find people who have made lots of money already as a property investor. And it just shifts your beliefs completely.
Yeah.
I would say that would be the number one thing that helped me leap. I mean, the leap that I took was crazy. I mean, I left Australia where I had already an established speaking business to move to a whole new country where nobody knew who I was. But the belief that I had was, well, I spoke to 6 other speakers who did it and was very successful. And so to me, it was a no-brainer. It wasn't the fear had subsided already a long time ago because the belief was strong. So that was a big one. That was a big one for me.
And then what about moments where it's not going too well? So
the persistent side of it?
Yeah, you don't get the gig, or you get negative feedback, you cop some hate, or you get that. How do you then navigate through those bits and pieces? Because there's always resistance when people are going for their dreams. We spoke about this, I think, in The Alchemist, the first episode that we did, where when you sit there and you reach for something, the universe will also try to put in some roadblocks before you're allowed to attain it. How do you then overcome that? Or like
to me, it's
where you were like,
yeah, I do.
I'm about to throw it in. I'm about to throw this in because it's not worth it anymore.
I don't think throw it in. I often think, how do I get better?
Yeah.
I rarely think about throwing it in. And I wonder why I don't think about that. Because I don't know. I'm not sure. Because to me, and I think that'll be a nice thing to explore in a moment as well. But for me, when I went to the US and things weren't working out for me in the first 6 months, I just reviewed and thought, okay, well, then how do I get better? So I don't spend a lot of time dwelling. I think I'm a tinkerer. So I will immediately go back and tinker and go, well, how can I make it better then? Yeah, I wonder. It's because I also have a lot of responsibility. When I went to the US, I had the responsibility of looking after my young family. I had a 2-month-old child when I moved to the US. So to me, that responsibility removes quitting as an option. It's like in the book they use the analogy of the soldiers all went to this island and then the captain burnt all the boats. So once the boats have been burned, the only way is forward. I think. And to me, the form of burning the boats was having a child.
Yeah.
Having a child is you burning the boats to quitting. Like I couldn't. I couldn't. It wasn't a choice. I can't.
So I think that's awesome. So it's having a reason behind it as well. So that becomes a fuel for belief.
Well, like having responsibility.
It's greater. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty cool point to touch on there. And you hear it a lot of the time when people have something saying the greater good or outside of themselves that they need to serve. That can be a real big driver for action as well.
This book talks about the definite chief aim, right? With like the definite chief aim being like your purpose in life. And I think our purpose in life is made up of many different things. But when I had a child, that's a part of my purpose. And the more purpose I have in my life, the less likely I am to quit. Whereas if I don't have a lot of purpose in my life and I'm not creating a lot of purpose, because I think some people think you discover your purpose. Like, I wonder if it's really you discover your purpose or do you create your purpose? It's like having a child. I didn't discover my child. I kind of created him. My wife did most of that work. But like when I created that purpose for myself, I had more drive. I had more discipline. I had more persistence. And like I said, children is a part of our purpose in life. It's not our only purpose. It's a part of our purpose. But it's a pretty damn big purpose for me right now. And I think that is one of the reasons why I never even thought about quitting as an option. It just...
Yeah. I don't think our purposes evolve. Like, I think
it does
the key
evolve.
with purpose is being able to just continuously define it or try to define it. And as we grow, as we change, I don't think, maybe there's parts of it that are predefined, who knows, but I think they definitely change. Like I wouldn't have had a clue what my purpose was when I was 15 or 16, but I had a little bit more clarity when I was 25 and then a little bit more clarity when I was 33.
Do you know what else I've realized is a purpose of mine? Which is, it's going to sound so simple, but I feel like a huge part of my purpose here is to have a good time.
Yeah.
You know, and it's so weird because I used to not think that. I used to think that, oh, purpose has to be something so, it's about contribution and it's about all these things. But no, I really think a part of my purpose in this life is just to enjoy it and have a good time. And ever since I've seen that with a bit more clarity in the last maybe 2 years, I'm happier as a result of just having that as a simple purpose.
One of the things, a little bit off topic, that I've been thinking about lots is just how we conceptualize moments in our life and time, right? So if you look at it, there's the present, there's the past, and there's the future. And if you look at a lot of the sort of narrative and the thinking these days, it's around, like all of us were like, well, I just want to live in the present moment. I just want to live in the present moment. But it's quite difficult to live just always only purely in the present moment. Like you might get little runs for 20 minutes or half an hour or 5 seconds. But I think for most people, it's pretty difficult to be like, you know what, month of May, I was just present moment the whole month of May. It was epic. Like went to sleep, woke up, present moment. Like all I had was the birds, like felt my body tingling, like tasted every bite of food that I had. Like it's just, I'm yet to meet people that are active in society that can achieve that. But I think that like this book's about the future, right? Then there's other books that are more around teaching us about the present. Then there's maybe other teachings that are about reflecting on the past and how we can find those clues. And I think it's all of it that is the answer, right? Like if you look at some spiritual teachings, the whole goal is like enlightenment and living purely in the present moment, which is great. But then those books that you're reading, like that enlightened person wrote that book and then sold the book for the future so that they could then share what it is. So it's like there's nearly a contradiction in that component where, and that person has also looked back on the past and they've collected all of their experiences that they've then written in the book that they're now sharing for the future, which is about the present. So it's like there's this whole component where I think it's around like embracing all of it, right? So if you look at this book, there's going to be parts of us where we have to look at the future and the things that we design that we want to then achieve. Then there's going to be parts where, all right, I've gone way too far in the future and I'm completely missing life and the experience which is right now. Like there is a truth in that. Like the only experience that you can have truthfully is right now. Like you can't experience the future. You don't know what that feels like. You can't truly like live in the past. The past has happened. Like even if you're living in the past, that's right now in the present moment that you're thinking about the past, but you're still in the present moment. So it's around, I think when you go back to even the concept of purpose, it's like, well, it's a bit of all of it. I think that people will have some parts of their purpose, which is maybe about the future. They'll have some parts of their purpose, which is about having fun and enjoying right now and embracing the moments. They'll have some part of that, which is learning about.
They've already fulfilled.
Yeah, that's already happened. Like having your kid already, like that's something that happened in the past that you're still now nurturing in the present that you're going to be planning for in the future. I can't remember what book it was that I was reading, and one of the questions that was asked is, it was a really cool question. It was something along the lines of, say you find out that you've got cancer and you've got 1 month to live, but then you also find out a month later there's going to be an apocalypse and the world's going to end. How does that then change your current actions, right? Because most of the time when that question's asked, it's like, well, what would you do if you only had a month to live or 6 months to live? But then what would you also do if you now knew that there was no future for anyone else or anything else that's out there? Like, would you go and write your book? Probably not, right? Would you, if you're into cancer research, would you go and finish off that piece of work to cure cancer? Probably not, because there's then no future. So it's interesting as human beings. Not only do we then care about the future of ourselves, our families, and everything else. But it's also about the wider society and the impact that we can have. So there's so many layers that we're trying to fulfill. I'm like, wow, that's pretty.
Wow, I never thought of that, because one is the end of your future, and then one is the end of all futures.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really fascinating.
That's another episode.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that there's a part of us that seeks. We seek that impact even when we're gone.
Yeah.
We almost want to still be here. We want a part of us to, I mean, I think that's aligned with whether it's a book or a child, right? Is that we feel drawn to these things because we don't want to be forgotten. We want to be remembered. I mean, even when you watch the old medieval shows of the Vikings and stuff, and the ultimate insult you can give a warrior is, I'm going to remove you from the history books of time.
Yeah.
It's like the ultimate insult, and we no longer sing songs about you. We'll burn all the books that wrote about you. And it's like, that is the ultimate fear that kings had, was that you're going to remove me from history. It's funny how we desire that. So part of our purpose is, that long lasting impact. Wow.
Yeah.
Why did you bring this up?
I don't know. Just freestyle
really
there for a bit.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Something about you speaking about purpose and like the different types of purpose and how it can evolve. But
there's purpose in the present, purpose you've already fulfilled, and then purpose in the future that you're yet to discover. So it's like 3 forms of purpose, right?
Yeah.
And I think a part of that is like reading books like this, or self-development in general, allows you to continually add new pieces of knowledge to help you solve the equation of purpose.
Yeah.
Because it's like purpose is this massive algebra equation with so many unknown variables. And I think every time you read something like a book, Think and Grow Rich, it might just give you X, but then there's also Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. Like there's so many different components. And one of the conversations I was having with a friend, last week I was just simply saying that I think purpose is something we create. It's not, I don't think it's something we discover. Maybe part of it you discover, but a lot of it you can just create. You can create your purpose. What do you want your purpose to be about? And I think when you create you've got many different things that make up your purpose, then it helps you become more persistent, to bring it back to what we're saying. Persistence is really having a strong purpose, or multiple of those, multiple purposes.
Sure. And I remember why I brought that up as well. It's because it resonated when you said part of my purpose nowadays is just to have fun. And I think it's about, to me, just adding on that, it's about embracing all of it, like the whole experience, and that was one of the things that was just sort of sticking out as you were speaking of that. And that's why I spoke about the moments. Like to me, so much about life right now is just creating cool moments and enjoying those. Like that would be a big part of my purpose, or embracing other moments, even if they're not that cool, but being aware of them and learning from them, whatever it is. But like, I'm really into the moments at the moment. At the moment.
Well, I think I am more so in the last couple of weeks, because 2 weeks ago I had a near-death experience. I don't think I've even told you about this yet.
Oh, what?
But yeah, dude. Okay, so I was driving in the car, and Craig and I were sitting in the car, and we were at an intersection, and the light turns green. So I just go, and I'm right at the start of the lane. So I just go, and then all of a sudden my car just brakes really hard, and like kind of shocks us because we go against the belt. And this car ran a red light and just zoomed past. It came out of freaking nowhere. And it shook the hell out of me.
Did your car see the
My car stopped.
come?
I didn't stop. I didn't see it, because like Craig and I were just engaged in a really good conversation. So I was just looking at the road, and I just, and I just took off and went, and my car stopped us. Bullshit. And this car missed me, dude. It was so freaking scary. And like, I was shook up for that entire night. And I just realized that, man, I could have just died at no fault of my own, and my life could have just ended in that moment. And it's why it brought to the forefront of my mind that a part of this life and the purpose of life is you just enjoy your time while you're here, and not to take things too seriously. I think that has stuck with me since that for the last 2 weeks. And it's just so crazy to think this all could have come to an end.
Yeah.
Like just like that. That's why it's so important, I think, to have a good time while you're here.
Yeah. Would have been a sad podcast without you.
Maybe that's what it would have meant to have made it go viral.
Just have see how we've got the 2 boxes. It's just like I still just speak to you, but it's just a photo.
You know what would make it go epic viral is if we both started the podcast at the same time.
This is no podcast.
No one would be here. It'd just be an episode of just silence. Oh, it'd just be 5 seasons of silence.
So billions of views, just nothing happening. Yeah.
Well, another thing that I really liked about this book as well is the idea of the mastermind, right? I feel like what you and I do often is a form of that. It's being able to talk to somebody else about the goals that you want to achieve, and then the other person is helping you move towards achieving that goal, and you're helping the other person move towards achieving their goal. There's something so beautiful about that. And it talks about how, in the mastermind, the way it talks about in this book is how it allows you to access this extra mind, and the analogy that they use in the book, I really kind of adore it as well, is that, when you get 2 batteries and you put it together, it's stronger.
Yeah.
Right. And it's kind of when we put our 2 minds together, we create almost this third entity, which they call like the mastermind. And it's essentially, if you put a group together that has more than 2 people, or 2 people or more, it's a mastermind.
Yep. 1 + 1 = 3, right?
Yeah. And I really like that, because whether it's with you or with some of my friends here in Adelaide as well, I love coming together with a common purpose of helping each other. It's so cool. I think if you don't have a mastermind, then you're missing out on. There's something there, and I find it hard to describe now that I'm trying to describe it. But I think a huge part of a mastermind is alignment and connection, and I think men need it. I'm sure women need it too, but I think women naturally come together in their friendship groups and almost organically create a mastermind. Whereas I think for men, we don't really do this. Yeah. When we
probably need it a little bit more structured. Like
we need
aligned with some sort of activity or something.
Yeah, we do. We do. Whereas I find my wife, when she gets together with her girlfriends, naturally they'll get around, they'll have a nice meal together. Then one of them will bring up something, personal, and then they all kind of help each other. And so there's like this natural organic thing that happens with a lot of women. Whereas men, it's just kind of, unless we actively make time for it, we don't do it. Because it's the whole, how you going, mate? Yeah, all good. How about you? Yeah, all good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Whereas Chantal will come home and with proper stories, she'll know everything about her friends. Like I'll go spend 8 hours with 5 of my mates. She'll be like, oh, how's blah, blah. It's like, I don't know, like not sure. We're just hanging out. We played golf.
Just watching the game. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right?
That's right. Yeah. It's like, we don't talk like that. Like I didn't want to burden him with conversation. We just wanted to hit the ball. It's like,
I didn't want to burden him with connection and growth. I just wanted to get straight to the alcohol.
Hilarious. But yeah, I think you're right. And I think going back to the mastermind thing is, you mentioned it earlier in the episode, how hard it is as we get older to make genuine friendships. The mastermind's a way of building connections. Like just joining any type of community is something that fires people up. Like I get to see it firsthand with Future Golf, and I see the power of people that come together with some sort of common purpose, right? And in ours, it's simple. Like it's just playing golf, but there's so many stories about members that have played around with somebody and they've then become lifelong friends, or they've started a business, or they've they've shared some problem that they're going through, and they've just been like, geez, if I didn't get to share that with that person that day where I didn't really know them and I felt pretty safe to be able to open up a little bit, it's like, wow, that's powerful. There's something in that. And I think the same thing happens with all sorts of communities like this. Like it's very rarely about just what it is that you're doing within that community. Like if you join some business networking group, like, yeah, you'll probably hear a couple of good speakers and they'll give you some topical stuff. But most people that are part of that group, the thing that they're going to value the most is the friendships that they make out of it, or the relationships that they build. It's the same with going to uni, I think. like, I don't know about you, but when I look back on my uni experience, I don't remember any of the content, but made some really great mates. I learned all these other skills that were outside of the actual thing that we're probably there for. And that's where the value was, whether it was travel or figuring out how to earn enough money to purchase the textbook so we could pass the exam, like all these.
Well, I mean,
but, yeah.
I know you're talking about connections with people in general, but I feel like when this book was talking about the mastermind, it was talking about, this is a mastermind that you create with the goal of building wealth and getting rich, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's not just a general group of people.
That's true.
It's a specific group of people for a specific purpose and cause. And I think that's important to kind of point out, because it's not just any group of people. It's not just going to, I don't know, a golf club and meeting with general people. It's you're kind of handpicking these people. Because let's say, for example, there's a group called EO, Entrepreneurs Organization, right? And I've done a bit of work for them in New York, in Los Angeles, here in Adelaide. I'm about to do some work for them in Sydney later this year. So EO is a group of entrepreneurs that come together on a monthly basis, and they have this thing called forums. And the forum is essentially a mastermind. It's a group of 6 or 7 of them. I'm not sure what the number is exactly, but they come together and they have a precise process that they follow. And I kind of use this as well with my cousins and a couple of my friends here in Adelaide, where when we come together once a month, what they do is there's a full process, right? So when you first start, you kind of state the rules of the mastermind and you say, everything we say here is kept between us. None of us will share this even with our wives or our partners or our husbands. This does not go beyond these 4 walls. Second thing, we will not judge each other, or we will not play status games in this environment. And we restate that every single time. So you set the scene. Then after that, you go through some fairly low-level questions like, if you had any superpower, what would you want? And then, you talk about another deeper question, which is, what's your definition of happiness? And then after that, you go into, hey, what's your top 5% this month? And what's your bottom 5% this month? Because a lot of the times it's very easy for us to talk about our middle 90%, right? Oh yeah, the week was this, the week was that. But we go, no, let's get straight to it now. We've had the surface level conversation. Let's go into top 5 and bottom 5 now. And then that's when you go into the deeper things. And then after that, you go, well, out of the top 5 and some of the bottom 5s, which one seemed pressing in this mastermind? Which bottom 5% seemed like it was an emergency that we should help that particular forum member or mastermind member solve? And then we take that as a point of discussion and you jam on that for an hour or more. And that's the very high level process of how people do it in EO, for example, which is the model we've kind of adopted. And
that's awesome.
With that structure, I can tell you that it helps solve problems. And a lot of them are not business problems, which is what's really interesting in my experience of having a mastermind. A lot of them are life problems, which I didn't expect, because I thought a mastermind, because when you read this book, it seems like a mastermind is going to help you build an empire that's going to take over the world. Whereas when it gets to it, the mastermind is something that helps us move through life and helps us solve life problems. You and I, when we do these things, how much of that time do we spend talking about business tactics versus us talking about how to achieve more happiness in our lives?
Yeah.
A lot more of it is spent talking about life and happiness and connection.
That's what everyone says even about EO, is that it's more of a support
therapy.
Group.
Yeah.
It is like, it's entrepreneurial therapy rather than
it is.
Yeah, about growing your business. But it's true, like the business, because it's, once again, right, the business is the external component of what we're doing. Like we're like, if you think about entrepreneurs in general, they're just the person playing the role to keep the entity going or to grow it or whatever it is. Yeah. Whereas what that group's there for, it's like, oh, well, you now come in here and it's a safe environment for you to then maybe sharpen that saw, so that emotionally, psychologically, whatever it is, you're energy-wise, you can solve. I really like the model of the top 5 and bottom 5% of the problems, because that's usually the bigger stuff. If you can then solve that, I'm guessing your odds of then going back and being a better leader or better thinker, innovator, team builder, whatever it is, it's probably going to increase a little bit, rather than if you're in a really highly stressful environment where you have to bottle it up and you then can't share it. Because I think that's the other thing that happens with people that are in a position of responsibility or leadership. It's very hard to then open up unless you're opening up to other people that are in a similar position of leadership and responsibility. And I think that's where the power of that model is too. But really cool process. I love the rules as well at the start. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say this as well, is that's something that I didn't read from this book, was the importance of the mastermind almost from an emotional standpoint. You know, I feel like when you come together with a powerful mastermind, you've got to be careful that there's not someone, like, you've all got to kind of be on the same level. Because the danger of, and you have to see each other as being on the same level, whether you are on the same level or not. Because one of the problems with the mastermind is everyone tries to be the hero. Do you know what I mean? You've got to be careful of those kind of groups as well, where there's one person that always needs help and then everyone's trying to be the hero for that person. Yeah, that's one of the dangers. I mean, I think after doing a mastermind now for a while, you've just got to remember to treat everyone very equal and see everyone as being an equal. Otherwise, that you know, the hero and the victim kind of happens in the mastermind. That kind of causes the mastermind to fall apart.
Yep. I love in the book too, there's an example of an imaginary mastermind where he picks, so he calls it, like, I think the Invisible Council. And he picks 5 people. Like, I think he's got like Abraham Lincoln, he's got Thomas Edison, he's got Andrew Carnegie, he's got whoever it is. But then before he goes to bed, he has like this meeting, which is imaginary, with these people. And I remember actually doing this, like,
oh really?
Exercise, like when I read the book the first time. And it was surprisingly interesting and cool. Like, because you get in there, and I can't remember who I had in. I think I had like Muhammad Ali. I might have had Steve Jobs. I can't remember. There might have been, I think, Michelle Obama in there. Like, there was like a group of 6 or 7. And I remember having the meeting and there was some sort of thing that I was trying to solve. And you actually do start picturing like what that individual would say in that meeting. Like, now, I don't think I took like maybe
Did any of them say anything profound to you?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think there was like, so long ago, but I'm trying to think back, and I think like Muhammad Ali would have just had confidence and charisma to it. So whatever the situation was, I think his advice was like, you know, like, just go at it. Like, dude gives a shit. Like, just do it, you know, with his style of outgoingness. That's cool. Yeah. Yeah. I think Steve Jobs was like just around, like innovate through the problem, think through the problem. Whatever it is, you know, I can't remember, there was another one where there would have been like, add a bit more heart to it, a bit more connection to it. So it's like, like you just go, you kind of envision what their personality types would be like, and then get them to.
It's such a powerful tactic. It's such a powerful tactic that allows you to look at problems from multiple different perspectives.
I forgot about that. I might do that again, to do a little invisible mastermind, because that's the other thing, right? Like, if you're not in a position where you can go and connect with 6, 7 different people, or you can handpick them and then meet up once a month. Yeah. It's the same way as, do you need your mentors to be physical, or can you get a mentor from a book? Like, I think this is the other thing, is like, can you make your mastermind like whoever you want? And you probably have enough data sets around what they're about to be able to have an imaginary conversation with them, if that makes sense.
That's so important, your imagination, because that's another point that the book talks about, right? The book talks about the importance of your imagination. And, you know, like what we said at the start of this podcast, was that the importance of thoughts. Thoughts are everything. Everything started as a thought, right? The chair you're sitting on started as a thought. The TV, the mic we're using, the streaming, the internet, everything was just a thought, and then it became reality. But you've also got to think about your imagination. Because sometimes a thought can come to you, but your imagination enhances the thought. And how often do we allow ourselves to play with imagination?
I'll share a cool little problem-solving technique as well that I've used heaps of times over the last 5-6 years. And if I've got something that feels like an overwhelming type of problem, so it's something quite serious, you know, when you get in the monkey mind and it's doing the pros and cons of every single side, what I'll eventually end up doing if I can't solve it and I'm a bit uncertain on it is I'll just sit on the chair, close my eyes for 10 or 20 minutes. I'll ask a statement about that problem. So to be like, all right, how can I solve X? You know, it might be as simple as that. And then I'll just sit there silently, eyes closed, and then just write. I'll have a piece of paper with me or a journal, and I'll just write down all the different thoughts that then come out. And funnily enough, like if doing that for 20 minutes, generally it gets to the point where there might be 5, 7, 8 different thoughts that have come out, but they're all out of my head now. They're on the piece of paper. I'm only focusing on that one thing rather than allowing it to consume the whole day. Get it out there in 20 minutes. And at the end of it, it's like, all right, well, let's pick one of these actions. And once that action's done, or it might be to take no action because now we've evaluated it all. It's like, oh, we'll just need to just accept this and move on. But then it's parked, it's finished, it's over. It's on the piece of paper, it's been jammed on and it's over. But so many, I'd say 60 to 80% of the time, there's some solution that's already within us that we already know, but we just need to unearth it and unlock it. So there's power in contemplation, on journaling on things, on reflecting quietly on them, rather than just trying to use that logical part of your brain to just barge through and solve the problem, or what we all do, which is we just punish ourselves with the thought of whatever that situation, that problem is for a day or two without doing anything about it, which to me, I hate that one the most.
And I think you provided an insight there too, in that when you are overwhelmed, it's hard for you to engage in your imagination. Yeah. I think when your mind is more clear, you are then able to play in your imagination more. You know, if you're bombarded by all these worries and these thoughts, where do you have the cognitive capacity to imagine anything? So writing these things down, I think, is going to help stimulate your imagination more, because you're clearing your mind and having room for imagination to occur. Well, I mean, that's what I wanted to speak to, right? Was that I'm trying to think, when's the last time I used my imagination to really paint? Like, when do we paint with that paintbrush? It's not often, because when I look at my son, or, you know, when I was at your place a month ago and playing with the kids in the lounge room, it's just, you know, your boy and my boy immediately imagined this game up where they just created a circuit where they'll jump on me, then I'd throw them onto this, and to them that was the bridge, and then, you know, they were jumping onto the beanbag, which was the mountain, and then this bridge to mountain to me, and then there's this, they just created this game in their head,
a world,
and then we'll play, like this world in their head, and they were playing it, and then all of a sudden the ground was, you know, this deep ocean, and your son was saying, "Oh, don't let Xander fall into the water," and it's like, they're engaging in their imagination all the time. And it's like, when do I make time and space for imagination in my life now? Maybe it's not for work purposes. Maybe it's just for fun. Like, when do I use my imagination? I can't say that I do often, you know, if at all. I mean, I'm trying to think back now. What about you? I mean, this book talks about the importance of it, you know?
Yeah.
Do you use it much at all?
I try to, probably not as much as I'd like, but look, the other week I had a few days away in New Zealand, and I love those sort of solo retreats, essentially, where that's where I try to then tap into that side of imagination, where I'll then write, you know, I'll just go for walks, no distractions, limiting all of those bits and pieces. And I think that's sort of where I get the real sort of self-reflective types of moments. And a lot of my imagination nowadays, it's probably through thinking and writing and maybe forming new ideas, seeing are there lessons that I've learned, whether it's about myself or that I want to share with anyone. What am I curious about right now? I think that's where my imagination goes. I wish that there was a little bit more playfulness with the imagination. Like the thing that, even after this, just as we're speaking about it, is, how, as we become adults, how do we add just that unbridled, unstructured play? Because even when I'm telling you about what I'm talking about, I'm like, still kind of serious, right? Like you're trying to learn about yourself, or you're relaxing, or whatever it is, you're resetting a little bit. Whereas I'm now thinking back to like that childlike type of enthusiasm. We spoke about it, I think, in Brene Brown's episode where we're chatting about that, but creating opportunities for play and also creating opportunities for true play with other people. Like I reckon it'd be really cool as us, like even as adults, like designing time for structured play. Like that's why, again, I go back to golf. I love that golf is something that's in my life because it's structured play. Like when I'm out there, you're playing, like the word playing, how often are you using the word playing? Like I play Lego. I love playing Lego. I love playing golf. I know you play video games, but it's like where else we love playing with the kids, right? Like, so where can you then add more play? And I think that would be really cool even with the business. It's like, I know when you were recording your course, it was really cool. You shared some videos with me where you and Craig are playing around. You know, I want to do that now a lot more with our business too, where we create things where it's more play-based, where it's not just work. It's not just about it being a successful innovation or whatever it is, or optimizing something. It's like, let's start playing a little bit more. And I think there's so much enjoyment in playing.
It's like when you play, you have fun, right? And I think fun again is a word that comes to mind when I'm creating my online course at the moment, and just allowing myself to have permission to play there. I think that's really, it's not just creating the course, it's having fun and playing in the course. I think that's important. It doesn't
matter what happens with the course, because worst case scenario, everyone hates it. At least you could be like, well, I had fun building it. I had fun creating it. It was playful. It then doesn't matter. Like it just does. I think that's the beauty in it. It's what we were speaking about as well. There's two ways around belief and purpose too. One is where we do it because we have areas of responsibility and we set standards for ourselves, right? Like that's such a cool way of approaching life too. And I think that's what you do. You perform at a very high level in the fields, and that's what I think's gotten you your level of success. I like doing it on the other side, whereas I like setting the bar relatively low, reducing the risk, but then maximizing any of the upside on it. But the results, like it just means that we all have different ways that we approach it. Like if you go and tell someone that's probably got more my personality type and you say, hey, you have to become the best in the world at this within a year, it's probably going to flip them out and they'll end up quitting, whereas, and then you give somebody my approach that's a perfectionist and that has high levels of standards, they're going to be like, this is the most pointless thing I've ever seen. Like, there's not even enough effort going into this. So I think it's awesome that we've got two unique ways that we approach doing things. And I hope for the listeners out there, it shows you that there's different ways to be able to attain different outcomes.
And there's more than just two ways, out of the two ways you just described, there's so many others, right? They're
the ones we use. Yeah.
And I mean, if we kind of, as we wrap this up as well, when I think about this book, the title says it all when it's Think and Grow Rich, right? Think and Grow Rich. It kind of really showed me and really presented to me in a way that opened my mind that it all begins and starts and ends with you. It's kind of like how we say that life is a single player game as much as we play with others. It's a single player game and it happens up here in your head. And this book teaches you many different ways to be able to master that game internally, right? I understand how the external environment impacts you, but then also understanding how it all starts with up here, man. It all starts with up here. And if you put yourself into a good state and you fill your life with fun and love and desire and purpose and clarity, then you're creating the optimal environment for you to be able to connect in with the ether, to be able to have good ideas come and flow. It's like a radio that is in tune with the radio station. If you're not in tune and you're not receiving the right signal, then you've got to change the channel in your head. And it kind of teaches you that you have control over changing the dial and changing the channel and changing the station. So if you're not happy and you're not enjoying the music you're listening to from the radio station that you're currently receiving, there are a lot of things you can do that are within your control. And if you check this book out, you can learn how to change channels so you can receive the right type of music for the right type of journey that you want to go on.
For sure. I think just being attentive to that, like when you are tuned in.
Yeah, attentive.
Like
attentive. That's good.
Like act on it, because you don't get those moments all the time of like when you're feeling inspired or you're feeling creative, prioritize it and really go at that, because it might be another month or another year or few, like 2 weeks until you get that feeling again when you tune into it. So I have nothing more to add, my friend, unless you do.
I'll just add one last thing. I think, again, this is a really good mindset book. I think it's a great mindset book to introduce you to the world of self-development. And then if you want more pragmatic things, there are books like Atomic Habits that go into all the pragmatic actions you can take that are fully backed by psychological evidence. This is a great book it's almost kind of like it gets you in the mood. It gets you thinking big. It gets you kind of at a very high level. Just don't listen to the audiobook with the guy reading it from the early 1900s. It will drive you insane.
Yeah, it's like your kind of eccentric grandpa. It's like the original version of the wisdom, and then it's been refined over 100 years nearly.
It's like when you watch comedy from the early 1900s. It's very different to this era. So you just kind of take it with a pinch of salt. And otherwise, look, I recommend this book, and I definitely see this book as a book that has definitely helped me on my journey. I hope you all enjoyed the podcast. And if you do, please subscribe to us on Spotify and iTunes and leave us a review if you would. Otherwise, we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.